Mr. Salah.
Here.
Mr. Satterfield.
Here.
Thank you. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item C is approval of the agenda. The suggested motion is to approve the agenda as recommended. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Barry, supported by Burton Kelsey. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the agenda as recommended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Next item is hearing of the public. The Board of Education affords members of the community 2 opportunities to address the board at its meetings. The first opportunity is now at the beginning of the meeting so that the community may be heard on issues that appear on tonight's agenda. The second opportunity is towards the end of the meeting and is reserved for items that do not appear on the agenda. In both cases, the individual time limit for addressing the Board of Education is 5 minutes. Those individuals wishing to address the board during either hearing of the public shall complete a comment card and provide it to the board president through Mrs. Abear. Mrs. Abear, do you have any comment cards at this time? No. Okay, thank you very much. Item 3 is the consent agenda. The suggested motion is to approve the consent agenda as recommended. I'll entertain a motion.
Support.
Motion by Burton Kelsey, supported by Barry. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the consent agenda as recommended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next item on the agenda are personnel recommendations. These personnel recommendations have been reviewed by the Human Resources Committee of the Board of Education. This evening, we have support staff recommendation and Schedule B recommendations for board consideration. For support staff, the suggested motion is that the Board of Education approve the employment of Melinda Mendel, Curriculum and Technology Administrative Assistant, effective November 10th, 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Paget, supported by Burton Kelsey. Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion as recommended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Roberts?
Mrs. Mendel does send her regrets. She was unable to make it tonight, but she wanted to, but was not able.
Thank you. This evening, we have 5 individuals to recommend to the Board of Education for Schedule B positions. They are Jared Ammons, middle school wrestling head coach; Jose Gonzalez, JV girls soccer head coach; Jake Hammerly, varsity girls track and field head coach; Scott Hoy, varsity boys soccer head coach and varsity girls assistant coach; and Abby Lorenz, varsity boys soccer assistant coach. All recommendations would be effective November 10th, 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Barry, supported by Burton. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you very much again. And Mr. Roberts, I do believe some of the coaches are here this evening.
We do have a number of the coaches here with us today. I'd like to start by just thanking Miss Flynn and Mr. Picano for their time with the interview process to get these through the WBEA process, or the contractual process, and get the coaches here tonight. We have Jared Ammons. Jared served, we got to meet Jared earlier as he served as an intern in our high school athletic office, and now he's currently working for the NFL flag football. Interestingly enough, I thought, it would be one of our local schools, but no, I think they're out of Georgia is where the club he's running while he works up here in Bloomfield. So we're happy to have him come on as a middle school wrestling coach. And then we also have Mr. Hammerly, Coach Hammerly. Coach Hammerly has been part of the track and field and cross country program since going through Woodhaven. He's been our varsity assistant girls and boys track coach since 2016, and he's been our varsity boys cross country coach since 2019. So we're excited to have him step up to the varsity position.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jared. Welcome. All right. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Item number 5 is the 2020-21 final audit. Here for her annual visit is Sarah Raffko with Cooley, Heel, Sabo, and Culkins to present the 2020-21 final financial audit for the Woodhaven-Brownstown School District.
Hi,
Welcome,
everybody.
Sarah.
Thank you for having me tonight. Josh and his team did a great job again this year. I know we were very intrusive with our audit and disruptive to their days, and we really appreciate all of their hard work. And we know it takes a lot to get ready for us, and they are always available when we have questions. So we just really appreciate everything that they do. So we will get started. So in your audit book, the first couple pages, you'll see a couple of letters. The first letter is our independent auditor's report. And this letter states that in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the district. So this is what we call an unmodified opinion. It's the best opinion you can get for a financial audit. So good job to Josh and his team. The next letter that we have is our independent auditor's report on internal control in accordance with government auditing standards. And we have two highlights from this letter. The first, it states during our audit, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that we consider to be material weaknesses. We did identify 2 deficiencies in internal control that we consider to be significant deficiencies. So significant deficiencies would be lesser than a material weakness, the better of the 2, and we'll see those in just a minute. But then we have another note here that states the results of our test disclose no instances of noncompliance or other matters that are required to be reported under government auditing standards. So that is a good, clean opinion to have. And then we have a third letter. It's our independent auditor's report on compliance for each major program required by the uniform guidance. So this letter specifically pertains to your federal awards that you receive. And in this letter, we state that in our opinion, the school district complied in all material respects with the types of compliance requirements that could have a direct and material effect on each of its major federal programs for the year ended June 30th, 2021. And then we also state that we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control over compliance that we consider to be material weaknesses. So with your federal awards, we had no issues. This is the best letter you can get. So as I mentioned earlier, we did have 2 findings. The first one was in the food service fund, and expenditures and accounts payable were essentially understated by approximately $176,000, which overstated your fund balance by the same amount. What happened is the June Sodexo bill came in. It's for the month of June. It comes in July. It was paid timely. It was just reported in the current fiscal year that you're in now, the 2021-22 year, instead of your 2021 fiscal year. So because that payable wasn't booked, you had overstated your fund balance. And then the second finding somewhat relates to it. We had expenditures in excess of amounts appropriated. So in the food service fund, expenditures exceeded the final budgeted amounts by about $130,000. And then in the bond project fund, expenditures exceeded the final budget by about $189,000. So the food service fund was likely that June Sodexo bill just wasn't budgeted. In the 2021 bond project fund, there was really not a whole lot you could have done about it. The bonds were sold on June 30th. You would have adopted your budget probably a week or 2 before that. You did not know exactly when the bonds were going to be sold. I know Josh had reached out to the attorneys, and they told him about some of the costs that there would be incurred, but they did not tell him all of them. So I think he did all he can do in that matter. The bond project fund, it's not even required to be budgeted. Only special revenue funds are required to be budgeted, but you choose to budget it anyway just for transparency purposes. And because of that, we have to include it here. Moving on in your audit, we have a management's discussion and analysis. This is written by the school district. It has to be fact, not opinion. Certain criteria must be disclosed. I typically don't spend any time on going over the numbers because we see all of the information in the back of your financials. But it's a good read. It's the only place in your financial statements where you're going to see comparative information from your 2021 year to your 2020 year. It offers budgetary highlights for both the 21 year and your upcoming school your upcoming school year. And it's just more conversational than the footnote disclosure. So I encourage you to read it. But like I said, we won't spend any time on that. Yep. Sure. So the management's discussion and analysis, that starts on page 7 and goes to page 14. And then we'll jump ahead to the general fund highlights, and if you look at, that starts on pages 49 and 50 is where that begins. You're welcome. So for your general fund, the fund balance ended at a total of 23.3 of your operating expenditures. Your fund balance policy states that you want a fund balance of at least 5 to 20%. So you're actually above your policy. Not concerned about that. It's nice to have that fund balance. This was a very different year because of all the federal grants coming in. Just keep in mind that the money's coming in now for all these COVID grants. They're not going to keep coming in. So any changes that you make would have to be sustainable. Your general fund revenues increased 5.8% or $3.5 million. Your state foundation allowance increased $1.1 million. You had $2.6 million in new federal grants that were specifically related to COVID-19. And then your at-risk revenue increased $300,000. Your expenditures increased 10.7% or $6 million. $3 million of that increase is in your salaries and benefits. $2.1 million of the increase is in purchase services, and $1.1 million is in your supplies. A lot of that is very explainable with the pandemic. In your salaries, the majority of it was in instruction. And then your purchase services, $820,000 was in your operation and maintenance. And a lot of that had to do with enhanced cleaning. $570,000 of that was in transportation. You didn't have buses running all year, the 2020 year, pretty much that last end of March, April, May, June, you didn't have buses going. So that explains why those expenses increased from the prior year. And then your supplies, the increase there, a lot of it was cleaning supplies and PPE, and most of that was funded with grant money. And then I always like to point out that your total salaries and benefits accounted for approximately 82% of your total expenditures. So 82% of your general fund expenses are paying your employees, your staff. Your fund balance increased $1.2 million and ended at $14.5 million. And your capital expenditures in the general fund included furniture and equipment, a welding machine, and a CNC cutting machine. Your 2021 bond project fund, so this was the new fund. The bonds were sold on June 30th, 2021. And you'll find this fund on page 60 of your financial statements. Expenditures totaled $269,000, and that was for debt issuance costs and other fees. Your fund balance ended at $39.8 million. And with this fund, we have a footnote. It's note number 20 that states that the school district complied with the applicable provisions of the revised school code. So anytime you have a bond project fund or a sinking fund, we have a footnote. We basically look at the expenses to make sure that they're spent, that those funds are spent appropriately. We had no issues. The 2020 bond project fund, which that one can be found on page 70. Your cash remained consistent with the prior year. Your fund balance ended at 1.6 million. And again, in this fund, we state that the school district complied with all the applicable provisions of the revised school code. And then we have your 2016 bond project fund. That is on page 69. Your cash in this fund decreased approximately 1.6 million. Your fund balance ended at 1.2 million. And again, we state that you've complied with all the applicable provisions. Major projects in this fund included locker room benches, technology equipment at Bates, remodeling at the high school, bleachers at the high school, a new firewall, cafeteria renovations at Patrick Henry and Brownstown Middle Schools, and then remodeling at the high school counseling office. Your special education fund, which is on page 65. Revenues here decreased approximately 53,000. Expenditures increased by about 266,000. And this fund always nets to zero at the end of the year, so the fund balance ends at zero. Your food service fund, this was a different fund this year. We saw a lot of variances. Your revenues increased by approximately 131,000. Expenses increased approximately 191,000. This is on page 66. You transferred 110,000 to the general fund to cover indirect costs. The major variance we saw in this fund was that your food sales decreased by about 80%, which is expected due to COVID, and your federal grants increased 24%, and that's because you got free meals district-wide this year, again related to COVID. So your fund balance increased approximately 135,000 and ended at 670,141. Your fund balance meets the Michigan Department of Education's fiscal requirements. They require you to not have a fund balance more of 3 months of your operating expenses. So you were fine there. You're within the threshold. We have a new student activity fund this year. This was on page 67. We had to implement GASB 84 for fiduciary activities. This used to be considered an agency fund. It was a standalone report included in your financial statements, and we basically just reported the cash and the amount due to the student activity groups. This year, with this new standard, we're required to make it a special revenue fund and include it with all of your other special revenue funds. So here, your revenues totaled 115,000, expenditures were 126,000. You transferred in about 11,000 from the general fund. Your beginning fund balance was restated to comply with the accounting standards. So even though it's a new fund this year, we basically brought their cash balance on at July 1st and put it on as a restated beginning balance. So in this fund, your fund balance ended at 153,214. Your sinking fund, which is on page 68, revenues increased by approximately 21,000. Expenses decreased by about 300,000, and your fund balance increased approximately 518,000 and ended at 1.5 million. And again, we state that the district complied with all the applicable provisions of the revised school code. Your major projects in this fund were for gym doors, a holding tank at Woodhaven, concrete pads, a high school track, baseball field irrigation system, and a washer and dryer at the high school. And then we have your debt service funds. So we have your 2015 debt, 2016 construction debt, 2016 refunding debt, and your 2020 debt funds. All of these together, the cash increased approximately 105,000. Your fund balance decreased about 108,000, and all of your principal and interest payments were made as scheduled. There's no concerns here. And then at the very end of your audit, it starts on page 71. We have your schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So these next pages summarize all of the federal grants you received this year. Anything that was specifically COVID related starts with COVID-19, so they're really easy to pick out. But this year it was an interesting year. Your federal awards totaled $7.9 million, which was an increase of $3.5 million from the prior year. So all of these COVID grants bumped up your number significantly. The major programs tested were the CARES Act funds and the coronavirus relief funds. When we do the audit, we have to do what's called a major fund determination to determine what programs we're going to test. And we test 20% of the total of your federal awards because you're considered a low-risk auditee. This year, because the numbers were so high, we had to test 2 programs to get to the 20%. Typically, we would only have to test 1 program. But again, we had no findings with your federal awards, no concerns. So that was great. And that's all I have. Like I said, it was a great audit. We really appreciate all of their hard work. Does anybody have any questions?
No, I'll just say we reviewed this in the last finance committee, so we had quite a bit of time to talk about it and look at it. I know it's a lot of numbers, but the 3 of us spent probably 45 minutes on it or so at our last meeting.
I just have a couple questions that don't need to be addressed tonight. This is for my own learning, so I can talk with you later, but I'd like to know more about the Student Activity Fund and what's in that particular fund. And also, I guess you can answer this question. The COVID money, did we have to apply for all those grants, or was that automatically distributed to us because we're part of the state funding? Or did we apply for those grants?
We do not apply for those grants. They were appropriated by the federal government, by way of the state.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. The suggested motion is that the Board of Education approve the final 2020-21 financial audit as recommended. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Paget, supported by Berry. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Sarah and
your team.
Josh.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is Superintendent's Report. The resignation of Rachel Lemon, effective back August 22nd, 2021, has been accepted. I would like to introduce to the Board of Education Beatrice Benjamin. Beatrice will be serving as the interim curriculum director here in the Woodhaven-Brownstown School District. A good portion of Beatrice's career was served as an academic coordinator for the Redford Union Schools and as the school improvement we won't hold that against. Oh, well then maybe we should rethink this. Beatrice has also served as the school improvement curriculum and assessment coordinator for the Taylor School District. She comes very highly recommended from organizations that we respect, like the Metro Bureau, but also from colleagues in neighboring school districts. So Beatrice, welcome, and we're looking forward to your contributions here.
Yeah. Perfect.
Today at Woodhaven High School, a physical altercation, a fight took place between multiple students. Took place at the start of lunch today. Our security monitors, police liaison officer, administration, and multiple staff members immediately intervened in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. When that wasn't successful, our partners from the Brownstown, Woodhaven, and Flat Rock Police Departments immediately responded to Woodhaven High School to assist. For a school, and this whole event took about 6 minutes, and those partners were on site within that 6-minute time frame. For a school that rarely experiences students engaging in fights and physical altercations, the one experienced today was certainly concerning, especially for our parents, students, and staff. Please know that the Woodhaven-Brownstown School District will continue to work relentlessly in providing the safest learning environment possible for our students and staff. As I indicated at the last meeting, a dress code conversation was held with student representatives from Woodhaven High School, Patrick Henry Middle School, and Brownstown Middle School, along with administrators and school counselors and myself. After an hour-and-a-half conversation, good dialogue was held, and we came to an understanding on 3 key topics to further discuss and pursue. And that is whether the limitations of the current dress code meet current standards for style, but also expectations for a school environment. The how, the second key topic would be the how in terms of the implementation of the dress code, from the, beginning sharing of expectations, and then through the process of administering a dress code. And then the third key point is making sure that our students feel that they are in a safe environment with trusted adults that they can talk to when they have concerns. So we will be scheduling another meeting here within the next week and a half with students. We are excited and pleased to share with the community that we have begun to make plans, if safe to do so, for a Woodhaven-Brownstown Education Foundation signature dinner event on Thursday, April 28th, 2022. Later this week, the Woodhaven-Brownstown Education Foundation will announce the event to the district and its partners. We'll also be announcing a new round of teacher classroom grant opportunities this week as well. And then lastly, a reminder to the board members that we have a bond visioning meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 5:30 PM. Next item on the agenda is hearing of the public. Mrs. Aber, do you have any topic? All right, thank you. Item 9 is board member comments.
I'll just mention the finance committee meeting after our board meeting today.
Thank you.
Mr. Grant, will the dress code policy, if there's any policy changes, does that go to the policy committee, or is that just handled
Ultimately
at the?
would, come
Okay.
to the Board of Education, yes. But yeah, going through that process,
Okay.
if there
thank you.
are any changes.
Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other board member comments, then the meeting is adjourned at 5:57 PM. The date and time of our next meeting, regular meeting of the Board of Education, is Tuesday, December 14th, 2021 at 5:30 PM here at the Administration Building.